We have some breaking news in that Donald Trump has officially endorsed Mike Johnson to be the new speaker for this upcoming Congress. Now, this is kind of shocking for a couple different reasons. So, first and foremost, you have to understand that Mike Johnson historically has not been the most MAGA person. He's a guy who's been a part of Congress and in politics generally for decades. A guy with a lot of experience since to not really be the most Trump person, but let's see what sort of logic goes behind this. So Donald Trump's endorsement of Johnson through Truth Social is very long, and I'll give you the cliff notes as to what he said here. So for whatever reason, I'm seeing that Donald Trump is just veering off into different tangents that are pretty funny. So I mean, he's talking about how he's the party of common sense, how he won the election in a landslide, despite again very large scale voter fraud. So he's still on that. And then he's talking about the Democrats paying for Oprah and Beyonce. But we get down to the endorsement of Speaker Johnson at the very bottom for whatever reason. He says Speaker Mike Johnson is a good, hard-working, religious man. He will do the right thing, and he will continue to win. Mike has my complete and total endorsement, MAGA. So that's interesting because you got to read into the pathology here. So Donald Trump has the endorsement of a guy. That's the item in the agenda. So, Mr. President, what's your statement? Again, when I think Mike Johnson two-page endorsement, I'm thinking it's going to be at least 90% about him and the endorsement. Now, this is the reverse where it's literally only the last like two sentences that mentions Mike Johnson, which is kind of odd. Instead, he's spending time talking about election fraud in California and Beyonce. Now, beside that, I think it's funny, but still, what does that imply if you're not talking that much about the guy? Now, most Donald Trump endorsements are pretty generic. It's something along the lines that they will support the Second Amendment, they'll protect our troops, they're going to serve our country really well. But at least with those endorsements of like generic congressmen out of, Texas and Arkansas, at least in that case, it's mostly about the person, even if it's an ad lib sort of thing, it's still, again, mostly about the endorsee. But in this case with Mike Johnson, he's more or less a shadow here, which makes me think that maybe Donald Trump either is, one, not super enthusiastic about endorsing Johnson and therefore isn't really putting forth the dedication in the endorsement, and is doing this as a formality. Or it could be that Donald Trump is doing this as some sort of 4-day chess thing, which I doubt, where he's saying, well, I'm going to neg him and say, well, you don't matter too much to me. So this endorsement will be purposely very much a disjointed piece of garbage post. And then Mike Johnson will take the message of, wow, really got to play happy with Trump to get him to be, more reticent or sorry, more, what do you call it? Like just more amicable. This is like very, very much, I don't know. I don't even know how to read this. It's crazy. Call me crazy, but I think that this picture is actually pretty descriptive of what the dynamic may be, where Mike Johnson is somebody who, again, is not the most MAGA, but is seen as a nominal improvement over Kevin McCarthy, who was the prior speaker for a while. And apparently, after the Matt Gaetz-led ouster of what's his name? Kevin McCarthy. We see that again. Mike Johnson is poised to be this kind of awkward fifth guy or sixth guy on the basketball team. He's basically the person that you say would be added last to the dodgeball team, the last person picked to go to a party, etc. And so he's seemingly, again, around Elon, around Trump, around his son, RFK, but again, not important enough to take one of the 4 seats. So what do I mean by this? Well, basically, look at the dynamic here. Mike Johnson is leaning over the side of Don Jr., who I met in person, by the way. Tangent aside, though, you'll see that, again, these 4 dudes are sitting at the table, but he is not more important. He, as in Mike Johnson, is not any more important than any of the other 4 that are in the picture. Again, which is just showing that Mike Johnson is awkwardly being endorsed by Trump. So I think they're both in this position where they have to live with each other. And to keep things copacetic, they have to pretend like they endorse each other. And they are officially. Now, again, like I've said before, Mike Johnson is not MAGA. Just generally, he's not. He's like one of these like generic Christian Louisiana Republicans, which is fine, but still needs to be noted. And beside that, Donald Trump, again, is cognizant of this, but he has to endorse him. You have to ask me, well, why is he endorsing Mike Johnson? I mean, he has all this clout. He won the popular vote. Why not just pick your own hand-selected leadership for Congress? But it doesn't work that way. Now, while Donald Trump has more control over the establishment politic of the country than he ever has, up until this point, it's true that he still has to work within certain parameters. And so when you look at the Wikipedia article, you'll look at the election here where Mike Johnson is leading a majority of only 220 seats, okay? So we've actually lost 2 seats on the net over 2022. In fact, we have a majority of only 5 seats, only 5 seats. Now, What that means is that when you're voting for someone to be the Speaker of the House, you need a majority out of the 435, I presume. So, what that means is that what the Democrats do, like historically they're known to be capable of, is just vote in line 100%. Whether that be AOC, whether that be Ilhan Omar, or whoever, radical leftists, they'll vote for the most generic Democrat, or in the case here of Hakeem Jeffries. They'll all 215 of them vote for Hakeem Jeffries. And then if Trump, let's say, were to endorse Matt Gaetz or somebody else for speaker somehow. But what would happen is that, let's say, only 214 Republicans listen to Trump, which is still like over, let's say, 90% of them agreeing to do what he wants them to do. And then all of a sudden, Mike Johnson has like 8 Republicans voting for him. And then the Democrats outvote the Republican by 1 vote. Then technically, Hakeem Jeffries would be the new Nancy Pelosi, and basically be the new speaker. That would be terrifying, obviously. And so that's why, as Donald Trump, you don't really have a say in what goes on in the House. Basically, Mike Johnson, despite being a pretty mediocre politician overall, is still in a position of leverage to where he has to force basically Trump to endorse him. Otherwise, you risk giving the House speakership to the Democratic Party. Mike Johnson cynically understands this, which is why they both, and again, they as in Trump and Mike Johnson, have to kind of, again, work together in a way that is kind of fake, and it's all political, and it's all incestuous, but that's how the swamp operates, okay? So bottom line is that this endorsement is very concerning because, on one hand, you can see how lackluster the endorsement is itself, which relays a message that is, again, disconcerting for anyone who thinks that Mike Johnson might be MAGA, but it's also alarming because it just shows what a lackluster performance we had at the House level when it comes to 2024. Now, there's reasons for this, obviously. The gerrymandering done by Democrats in the past decade have made it really, really difficult for Republicans to have a strong majority for the next several years. That still doesn't excuse the fact that several Republicans at the House level underperformed Donald Trump, especially in demographically diverse areas like California with Hispanics. And so Mike Johnson keeps the speakership despite losing seats, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles. While we might think personally that this Mike Johnson speakership is pretty unexciting and it's very milquetoast, it could be even worse. It could get even worse. Now, Radical Politics says here, there's no viable replacement for Johnson, like it or not. We cannot afford to go through this chaos again, especially with such a slim majority. Now, speaking of that slim majority, though, this is kind of concerning to read. Apparently, obviously, all Democrats will vote against Johnson, but Representative Thomas Massie has signaled his opposition to Mike Johnson. Now, this is terrible because, again, we don't have an alternative, and we can only afford to lose 2 Republicans because it's a 220 to 215 majority, meaning that the vote could go down to, let's say, 218 versus 217 in opposition. And frankly, again, when you only have a margin of 2 Republicans out of 220, that means that you have to have about 99% consensus around Mike Johnson. So now Representative Massie is literally half of the right way to blocking Johnson and then installing inadvertently Hakeem Jeffries. That's the scary part. The awkwardness further builds, as you can read here, that many Republicans, though, aren't publicly discussing an effort to oust Johnson yet, despite general unrest around the conference. No one is happy with Johnson, but no one wants to talk openly about the alternatives, said a House GOP aide, who granted anonymity to speak candidly. So, I mean, it's a complete show, it's a complete crapshoot because all of a sudden you have these opportunistic Republicans that are one-ups, again, people from Indiana, whatever have you, that are saying, well, now that I have leverage, I'm going to start extorting and getting commitments from Mike Johnson. And while you might think, well, that's a win for conservatism because a lot of these commitments that they're wanting from him are about, stopping the debt and whatever else, and that's great. But again, do not risk the whole biscuit for, again, we could have Hakeem Jeffries as speaker. This is actually pretty concerning when you think about it. Now, candidly, I would say that there's probably a 90% chance that Mike Johnson gets confirmed to speaker. And I'm not excited about that. But again, this is about preventing the worst case. Worst case, again, imagine a Republican Senate, Republican presidency, but somehow a Democrat speaker. I mean, it would just block so many good things from happening. So, in summary, we have Massie over here from Kentucky saying that we've seen Johnson partner with Democrats to send money to Ukraine, authorize spying on Americans, and blow the budget. So, apparently, It seems like Massey, among others, are going to make this huge stir about Mike Johnson becoming the speaker. And while I do think that he will get confirmed, it's going to make it an ugly mess, and it's going to waste everybody's time. Will Mike Johnson be this great speaker? I doubt it. But if he follows Trump's agenda to keep himself in power, then I'm okay with it. I mean, realistically speaking, as long as he goes with the flow and the flow is great, then we're in a flow state. And we love this United. Okay, I'm rhyming. Anyways, if you like the video, like the video. Subscribe if you haven't yet. And I'll see you on the next one. Adios.